idiots can do anything we put our minds to. I played a nuclear psychiatrist in a James Bond movie.
Broadly speaking, former Bond girl actresses have nothing but positive things to say about their time with 007. Being a Bond girl is more than just a badge of honor, it's cinematic immortalization, it's a life-changing role for whomever takes on the mantle, and usually for the better in all but a few cases, and one of those being the reception to Denise Richards' Dr. Christmas Jones in The World Is Not Enough.
And don't make any jokes, I've heard them all.
And don't just take my word for it, these are extracts from Richards' autobiography talking about her involvement with The World Is Not Enough. I knew you had to have thick skin in this business, but this was my first time receiving criticism, and it stung. It was so public. Talk about being stripped naked. Right before going on MTV's Total Request Live before heading to Europe, I found a USA Today review of the movie in the dressing room. I'd been taught to avoid reviews for this very reason. This one slammed the movie and me. How was I going to go out on live TV and put on a happy face about the movie? How the hell was I going to do nearly 4 weeks of press across Europe knowing people thought the movie sucked and I was a terrible actress? I felt I was unduly singled out. And she really does have a point there. Even the more positive reviews of the time couldn't help but hone in on her and the character for special attention. And seriously, for the purpose of this video, I went back to some of the reviews from the time that the film came out, and other cast members are kind of glossed over in a lot of places, but Richards will have entire paragraphs dedicated to her. Dressed in tight shorts, a sports bra, and heavy work boots, Richards is humorously unbelievable every time she opens her mouth. She seems a bland girl next door compared to the exotically fascinating and talented Marceau. Denise Richards, who has built her career as a nubile sex symbol without too much grey matter, is now Bond's latest pin-up ally as Christmas Jones. She's hardly the world's greatest actor either, but we're meant to believe that she's a nuclear weapons expert. But Denise Richards draws unintended laughs for her singularly callow portrayal of a nuclear weapons whiz. The World Is Not Enough is in fact not enough to add up to a fully satisfying movie.
This will not stand.
It's no wonder the actress came away with somewhat mixed feelings about appearing in the film, or at least I certainly get the sense of a bittersweet experience from her from reading her autobiography. I had a horrible pit in my stomach, and I was embarrassed doing my interviews, feeling as if every journalist were making fun of my performance. Whether or not it was true, it was how I felt. For the record, years later, EW named me the worst Bond girl, so I was right. Some were making fun of my performance, but hey, I was a Bond girl. Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. Reviews of the time obviously were what they were, but it's been 25 years since the release of The World's Not Enough, and since then I've seen more and more retrospective reviews and appreciation for the Dr. Christmas Jones character, which is something that I think is quite wonderful. Christmas can come every single day of the year, as far as I'm concerned.
007.
I was around about 11 years old when I first saw The World Is Not Enough, and I loved the film then, I love it now, and so did all my school friends. I remember vividly one of my best friends at that time had a poster of Denise Richards blue tacked to his bedroom wall because he thought that she was just the most beautiful woman to ever live, and yeah, Dr. Christmas Jones was a character that we had a lot of love for, and a character that extended beyond just the film for us. By that I mean, you know, I had the PS1 game of the film and played that a lot as a kid, so I have fond memories of being James Bond and rescuing her at the end of the game and what have you, and then Nightfire came along and she was included as a playable multiplayer skin along with only Pussy Galore and Wei Lin representing classic Bond girls from the previous 19 films at that time, and rather than scramble to try to beat my friends to be any of the Bond variant skins, I was always rather happy just staying out of the skirmish and quietly selecting Christmas Jones as my playable character. This was a time before I was actively online and I hadn't been on any Bond forums or anything. My only exposure to opinions and facts about James Bond were really my friends and family and any of the widely published books I had read from cover to cover many times, and it was only really when I started being a bit more active online that I realised that there was so much, well, frankly, hate for this character out there. And look, I'm not here to say that anyone that does not like Denise Richards as Dr. Christmas Jones is wrong. Everyone has their own opinions, everyone can probably cite at least a few films where they haven't liked a particular performance or a character in the film, but I do think that in this case, some of, if not a lot of the hate and ridicule is overplayed, and I include myself in that, by the way. I mean, in the very original review video I made for this channel, back when YouTube videos were recorded on potatoes rather than cameras, I couldn't help but resort to the lowest common denominator of ridicule.
Do you really think anyone could possibly take her seriously as a nuclear physicist? A nuclear physicist?
And yes, now I cringe an awful lot looking back at that, largely because it wasn't truly how I felt deep down, but I was a wannabe YouTuber at the time, back when YouTube was still a relatively new thing and film reviews on YouTube were still a relatively new thing, and the style of the time was that you had to be OTT and outrageous and, petulant and quite silly, really, and, Denise Richards as Dr. Christmas Jones online. It was the low-hanging fruit to go on a rant about, but it wasn't truly how I felt, and in many ways I feel like this video is going to be somewhat of a repentance for me. Again, as I say, I'm not here to change anyone's minds, but I do hope that some additional context surrounding Richards' casting in the film, her experiences during the shoot, and the aftermath and legacy of the character might help inspire some newfound appreciation in even the most Christmas skeptic ones of you watching. So that actually sounds like I do want to change people's minds. In the fall of 1998, I auditioned for the part of Dr. Christmas Jones, the next Bond girl, in the movie The World Is Not Enough. Though I'd never seen a James Bond movie, I know, that's hard to believe, I knew being a Bond girl had its pluses and minuses. Some women never escaped the stigma, others used it to their advantage. By the late 1990s, Denise Richards was a very known commodity. Despite relatively few leading roles under her belt, she had risen to prominence through modelling and guest spots on TV shows, but Starship Troopers in 1997 would thrust her decisively into the public eye.
Pilot Trainee Abanez reporting for duty, ma'am.
She is third billed in the Paul Verhoeven sci-fi actioner and, dare I say, really quite great at it. I revisited the film for the purpose of this video, and like most Paul Verhoeven films, they just grow on me more and more every time I see them. I think that Starship Troopers is especially strong as a satirical dark comedy, and Richards is utilised really well. I know that she mentioned in interviews since that she and much of the cast weren't entirely aware of some of the more subversive elements of the film, and until after filming had finished, that is. So the level of intention from each of the actors regarding, let's say, camp appeal is questionable, but Verhoeven certainly gets the most out of everyone, and especially Richards. I think she is a delight to watch in this film. But the movie that often gets cited ahead of Starship Troopers when it comes to Richards' casting in Bond 19 is Wild Things, a film that, until making this video, I had never actually seen before, and as it was the film that launched Richards into movie stardom, quite frankly, I figured I should check it out.
Sweetheart, lovely girl. It's bloody good, actually. I watched her in Wild Things. Good, it got my attention.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I can see why they'd want to cast her as a sexy, sexy Bond girl after seeing that. Though I think Richards brings a lot more to the film than just her incredible good looks and sex appeal. Wild Things is a really salacious, horny, thrilling, and very camp watch. There I go again, using the word camp, but it's the kind of film that I would imagine would be super fun to watch in a cinema with a packed, fun, and willing audience. It's certainly not going to be to everyone's tastes, but I thought it was loads of fun, and the cast are all really well selected, with Richards actually being something of the highlights. I mean, she's this outrageous character in that film. She has some of the best and more memorable moments, and I can see why that film made a pretty big splash, pun intended, when it was initially released. In no small part thanks to her especially.
Fuck off!
Though not released at the time that she was cast as Dr. Christmas Jones, Drop Dead Gorgeous came out in the summer of 1999 and provided another leading role for the actress in another film that I actually really like an awful lot. It's another satirical comedy, this one about a beauty pageant and the contestants rather than, Space Marines, but I think Richards is kind of pitch perfect in her role and displays a great level of self-awareness and is really not afraid to poke fun at her own image. All of this positions her perfectly for the lead Bond girl role, surely. Beautiful, knowing, charming, funny. Well, it doesn't help that The World's Not Enough. I mean, she is the main Bond girl of the film. She is the woman that Bond ends up sleeping with by the end of the thing. But the film's narrative is far more focused on a different female star, specifically Electra King, played by Sophie Marceau. King is initially set up as Bond's main love interest, but switcheroo, she's actually going to be the film's villain, and she has this whole plot baggage with M, and Bond's whole emotional arc throughout the film is in relation to Electra. In the Bond 50 Blu-ray set, each of the films is accompanied by an image of that film's main Bond girl, except for The World Is Not Enough, which sees Sophie Marceau in the coveted spot rather than Denise Richards. So to say that Christmas Jones is overshadowed by Electra King, King is not an understatement. And that's by design too, of course. I mean, the film is about Electra. And if this were a film set in the Daniel Craig era, where they were less conscious about sticking to the traditional Bond movie formula, I think that Christmas Jones wouldn't have even been in the film at all. But this was 1999, and precedent dictated that Bond must end the film either in bed or on a raft with a beautiful woman, and so Dr. Christmas Jones was created. The fact the role is less developed than some of the others in the film is not overlooked by the film's production either. This is director Michael Apted speaking on the film's audio commentary.
And she has a difficult role, perhaps a less developed role than some of the others. So I needed someone who could bring a lot of individuality and kind of flair to it.
And indeed, perhaps some of the reasoning behind why the character is underdeveloped is because there seemed to be some back and forth about what she should even be. According to the phenomenal Some Kind of Hero, the character went through a variety of incarnations before landing on what we see in the final film. The character was originally written as a French Polynesian girl working as an insurance investigative agent for Lloyd's of London. UA asked if her profession could be altered, as they had just greenlit Pierce Brosnan in the Thomas Crown Affair, in which his love interest was also to be an insurance investigator. Christmas Jones briefly became a bounty hunter before they settled on a nuclear physicist. Further to that, it seems like it was a studio mandate that the character be American rather than French Polynesian. United Artists Lindsay Dornan insisted the second female character, Dr. Christmas Jones, be American. Sophie Marceau was clearly somebody for European audiences and very important to the movie overseas, and the overseas aspect of a Bond movie is huge. It made sense to have somebody in the other part who was more known in America. With Electra King, Apted recalled that there was a concern from the studio that they were moving too far away from the archetypal Bond girl. Purvis and Wade were asked to rewrite Christmas Jones to make her more American and sassy. Hollywood star Denise Richards fitted the bill nicely. Now, Electra obviously ended up being played by a French actress, so I can understand why they would want to change that, just to have some diversity in the nationalities of the lead female stars. But this also tracks with something that I've always considered to be something of like an Americanization, I guess, or an attempt at an Americanization of the Pierce Brosnan Bond films. The World Is Not Enough is in the middle of 3 Brosnan Bond adventures co-starring prominent American actresses in leading roles. Terry Hatcher as Paris Carver in Tomorrow Never Dies, and Halle Berry as Jinx in Die Another Day. I don't think it's a coincidence that none of these actresses typically rank highly in lists compiling the best Bond girls of the series, and I think that this is in part there being a little bit of snobbishness, actually, about American Bond girls. It's a bold claim, I admit, but I have a feeling that a part of this is down to the fact that American Bond girls tend to have the more known and recognisable careers to a majority of English-speaking cinema-goers, that is. Terry Hatcher was well known for Lois and Clark, Denise Richards was a recognisable name, she was an It Girl, I mean, Halle Berry was an Oscar winner by the time that her Bond film was released, which means that people can't help but come to them with preconceived notions. Compare this with a lot of other Bond girl actresses who I don't think it's unfair to say are mainly known to a lot of native English-speaking cinema-goers purely for their turn, or indeed turns, in Bond films, so there's nothing else there really to influence opinion. I don't say this with any sense of pride in my own ignorance, but Claudine Auger from Thunderball, for example, I have never seen this actress in another film despite her having quite a lengthy career. Berenice Marlowe is a more recent example from Skyfall. She's been in other films, but I haven't seen them. She isn't a regular figure on UK talk shows or magazine covers or what have you, but in a way, actresses like these are all the more iconic in their Bond roles as a result of my inability to conflate them with any other role or indeed any real-life personality. Denise Richards, on the other hand, was a known personality in her own right. People had seen her on talk shows and on magazine covers. There was a lot of exposure about her around that time, and yeah, I think that there's a certain amount of snobbishness at play, because when it's a European actress that maybe you don't know from anything else other than their Bond role, there's an inherent mystery and ambiguity there. There are no preconceived notions. My point being that I do think that there were and are perceived notions of Richards based on her other work, her publicised relationships, her reality TV career, and I think that those are pretty unfair, actually, and this isn't an entirely retrospective thing either. I was surprised, actually, looking back at talk show appearances that Richards made around in the late 90s, early 2000s, like, just how much like a piece of meat she's treated on some of these talk shows.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, very
How
nice to
are
meet you. Never met you before.
I know.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Nice to have you.
Guys!
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was for me.
Yeah.
I thought Pierce Brosnan had the best hair until I saw yours.
That is very nice.
It's true.
The James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, and this
you have great hair.
Well, if you'd like to touch it again after the show.
Try and calm yourself. Trust me, that's my thing.
I get that it was a different time, and, Richards really does hold her own in these situations. She goes along with the gags, and I get that, it's a flattering joke to make about somebody, like acting like a Tex Avery cartoon wolf at the sight of her, because, well, yes, she's a gorgeous human being, but I was actually really taken by how humble and shy she comes across in pretty much every interview I've ever seen her in, and this was reflected in her autobiography too. I was surprised at how, well, frankly, down-to-earth she comes across in a way that you just don't expect from big Hollywood stars. This extends to her recounted experiences of shooting the film as well. I think that Richards has, maybe this is my own preconceived notion, I think she has a reputation for being something of a party girl, but she really comes across as, well, kind of shy, and it sounds like filming The World Is Not Enough was a bit of a lonely experience for her. I always loved being on location for a movie. I love bonding with the cast and hanging out, getting to know one another. This experience was different. I had nobody to hang out with. Pierce was with his family, the crew all had families in London, and Sophie Marceau was in and out of Paris, where her family lived. I was lonely on this long shoot, but it was a huge opportunity, and I sucked it up, focused on my work, and asked my mom to fly out and see me. And she certainly never implies that, she was deliberately excluded from social events or anything like that. It's just that unlike Starship Troopers, where she was the same age as much of her co-stars, they were all at similar points in their career, it was a new movie and all that kind of thing, there was real camaraderie. On The World Is Not Enough, people just had families and lives and were near home, so it was kind of a different experience for her. This may be a contributing factor to what some identify as a lack of chemistry between Brosnan and her, but really, I don't think that the part of Dr. Christmas Jones is given all that much scope for chemistry with Bond. They don't really have all that many scenes together that aren't suddenly interrupted by an action sequence. If there are criticisms to be had with Dr. Christmas Jones, I believe it to be the fault of the writing rather than the actor, and to say that, I don't mean to blame the credited writers themselves, but more just it sounds like the focus of all of the behind-the-scenes creative talent was on Bond and Electra and Renard, and Dr. Christmas Jones was included because, hey, Bond needs to sleep with someone beautiful at the end of the film. She has things to do, of course. She helps Bond escape the bunker, she has some necessary exposition to convey regarding the nuclear bomb and whatnot. It's just a shame that nothing more is made of this particular statement, the only moment in the film to allude to her having some grander role outside of the film's plot.
What are you doing here in Kazakhstan?
Avoiding those kind of questions, just like you.
Could she be an agent herself? Who is she really working for? The fact that she was underserved by the writing is something acknowledged by former MGM United Artists executive Jeff Kleeman in this terrific and incredibly revealing interview with SpyHards Podcast.
One thing that we're big fans of, because we've had Denise Richards on, is Dr. Christmas Jones, and that idea of having this sort of Bond girl stereotype in many ways, but also giving her a lot of agency in the film. She's a doctor. She is sort of the key for a lot of the plot. Where did that sort of character come from? What was the sort of motivation, inspiration for creating Dr. Jones?
We wanted strong, smart women.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to have a foot in traditional Bond and a foot in where the world was headed. With Sophie Marceau, we knew we did not have a traditional Bond girl. So we figured we should cast somebody who seems like a more traditional Bond girl as a nod to that. At the same time, we wanted her to be a modern woman for that time, to have a real job, to have real intelligence, to be somebody who might be underestimated, but shouldn't be underestimated. I think I'm correct in saying Wild Things had just preceded our casting Denise, because I believe it was seeing her in Wild Things that made us say she's really interesting as an actress, that there's a lot of different qualities, whether it's comedy or dramatic, that she can tap into. And let's see what would happen if we put her in a Bond movie. I feel like we did her a disservice, and I think that disservice was probably across the board. I don't think her character was ever written to the degree it needed to be to give it the complexity we wanted it to have, probably because we had so much focus on Sophie Marceau's character. I also think that in terms of, honestly, the way we shot her, the way we dressed her, everything, it was just a perfect storm of missing the mark. And that's one case where I know the critics did kind of go to town on her. And I feel very badly about that because I don't think she deserved that. I think that was just where our intentions were good, but we didn't manage to pull them off the way we should have.
Like I say, I think that If the World Is Not Enough had been made at a time where the production did not feel like it had to so strictly adhere to a perception of a Bond movie formula by including her, she wouldn't have made it through to the final script. But if I'm saying all this about, like, how the character is underwritten, and, like, does she even need to be in the film, and was she done dirty by the script, then why do I, and so many other Bond fans, frankly, carry so much love for this character? Well, I think Pierce Brosnan himself sums up a lot of my sentiments in this press conference clip that you can see on the film's Blu-ray extras.
Denise is a young woman who's just starting out her career. She had all the humor of being in a Bond movie and playing a nuclear physicist, running around in hot pants and spouting a lot of gobbledygook jargon. I would say to her, I said, "What did you just say? Do you understand what you're saying?" "No." But it didn't matter. It's a Bond movie. And I think, I thought she was brilliant. I think she's a really fine young actress, and she's got a good sense of who she is and style about her. Those who may not get her performance are missing the mark.
In a film that largely tries to do something different and darker with the Bond formula, Dr. Christmas Jones is a beacon of fun and levity. After watching Starship Troopers, Wild Things, and Drop Dead Gorgeous all together recently, I really do think that Richards is something of an underrated queen of camp. She's an absolute delight to watch in all of these things and seems to instinctively understand exactly what the assignment requires. I think it's also important to point out that, well, to be perfectly blunt, she's here for the teenage boys in the crowd, right? And while I was technically a preteen at the time of the film's release, I can attest to that. As I mentioned earlier, she was a character responsible for some early lustings amongst my friends, and perhaps that's a crass thing to say, but I do believe that it's in keeping with something of a Bondian tradition. Obviously, Electra King is also a woman who is beautiful beyond current words invented by humanity, but she's the villainous, and a pretty haughty one at that. Christmas Jones was the good girl, the one young men in the audience were allowed to fantasize over being with, being in Bond's shoes, being the hero and saving the world and getting the girl, and truly, I think fantasy is the key word here. The subject of Richard's believability as a nuclear physicist comes up a lot in reviews, and I can appreciate that mileage may vary on this point depending on how much you as an individual can buy into fantasy in your Bond movies, but after the Daniel Craig era where so much of that stuff was pulled back on for the longest time, I have an even greater appreciation now for Bond films that really do embrace it. All kinds of Bond films and characters can coexist. I love Casino Royale, I love Moonraker, I love License to Kill, I love On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I love Dr. Christmas Jones. I think that she is a fun presence in this film, and one that works as a really effective counterbalance to some of the more serious drama going on in the film with Electra. I appreciate that to some this melding of tones may not work, but I've always really loved the film for it. I love it when Bond films have more than just a toe dipped in fantasy, which is part of the reason why I've always loved Dr. Christmas Jones. She has sex appeal in buckets, she has funny moments, some fairly badass moments, she becomes crucial to the mission in a couple of vital spots, and if Bond didn't have her to help him save the day at the end of the film, it'd all just end on a bit of a downer, wouldn't it? And I would not want Bond 19 to end any other way than what we have in the final film.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
Richard's final comments about working on the film in her autobiography are somewhat downbeat, and given the drubbing she received at the time of its release, it's perhaps unsurprising. There were probably some movies I shouldn't have done along the way that weren't best for my career, but they did allow me to buy a home for my parents, and I bought a new truck for my dad's 50th birthday. It meant a lot that I was able to do that for my family. So it was a delight for me to hear her interviewed by the wonderful guys at the SpyHards Podcast. This interview was conducted some years after her autobiography was written, and I'm really happy that she seems to be more upbeat and positive looking back on this role these days, because she is a part of cinema history, being in a Bond film as the main Bond girl, so it seems only fitting to give the final word on Dr. Christmas Jones in this video to Denise Richards herself.
This interview stemmed a little bit from a tweet that me and you were both tagged in, and someone had said about not taking your character seriously, and you replied saying being a Bond girl is fantasy.
Right.
It's like and that was the perfect encapsulation of it, and I think that really brought it home, and I'm glad you stood up for the character in that sense, because that's what it is.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. I mean, you know, it's a Bond girl. And I mean, look, I did get a lot of shit for it, but I was like, but if I didn't do that, I would have gotten, you know, a little bit of crap for that too. So, you know, that's what movies are. I remember movies as being fantasy. It's an escape. So let's escape and have fun and have a fantasy. So that's how I looked at it.
I can't recommend enough checking out the full interview, by the way, as well as the Jeff Kleeman one that I took a little snippet from earlier on. That interview in particular is one of the most fascinating recounts of the Pierce Brosnan era, the production of those films, specifically like his first three in particular, and Jeff Kleeman is such a wonderfully candid interviewee, and Scott and Cam do a fantastic job interviewing him. Seriously, links below. Do check out those podcasts if you're a fan of this film and the Brosnan Bond films, or even just the production of movies in general for the Jeff Kleeman podcast. Then you'll get a lot out of it, I'm sure. And also below, please do let me know your own thoughts on Dr. Christmas Jones, of course. Is this going to be a generational thing? Is this going to be the kind of thing where if you grew up in the 90s, you just have so much nostalgia and fondness for the character, or is the love a little bit more widespread? Please do let me know below. Also below are links to my various social medias, and there is the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button, so do hit those to stay up to date on future video uploads, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.